Hello, friends. I am Angie Brooks with the Gilbert Summit branch of the Lexington County Public Library. And today I have got Tyler Ryan with me to talk about Media Matters. Tyler, I'm gonna read this intro because I don't want to leave anything out. You've got such an impressive and long career here, but Tyler Ryan is an award-winning television and radio personality, writer, speaker, and host. He has been seen and heard in broadcast media and read in newspapers and magazines for over 30 years. Tyler has worked in a number of U.S. markets and in the Cayman Islands, but for the last 16 years, he's been a constant right here in the Midlands. Starting at New 92 Radio and Watchbox as the morning show host and executive producer, Tyler shaped the presentation of the programming, ensuring that the stories aired were held to very strong journalistic standards. In 2015, Tyler left Watchbox to become the cruise director of Carnival Sunshine and then returned to television in 2016 as the morning meteorologist and host at ABC Columbia, as well as the host of a syndicated radio program, Carolina Cares. Tyler's won several awards throughout the years, including the Television Personality of the Year from the South Carolina Broadcasters Association. He has an incredibly diverse background, which includes not only the media, but also law enforcement, and he's a boat charter captain on Lake Murray as well. So tonight, Tyler's going to be talking with us about the historical role of news media and its effect on public perception, as well as the current state of news and the impact of social media. He'll be giving us some great tips on how to be responsible media consumers in the digital age. So, all that said, and without any further ado, I would like to welcome you, Tyler Ryan.
Thank you, Angie. There'll be a test on all that later on, by the way.
I'll be ready.
Wow, my goodness. All right, y'all. Well, good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this forum, this program this evening. As Angie said, I'm Tyler Ryan. I'm a television host. In fact, every morning at ABC Columbia, I'm the morning meteorologist, so I get to give you your weather. Yes, a job where I can be correct about 50% of the time and still keep it. Not bad, right? And I do host the Carolina Cares radio program. It's on the iHeart radio network, also the South Carolina radio network. And it's great. We talk about everything in the Midlands and beyond in the state. You know, in those roles, I've always had, and I have throughout my career, had opportunities to interact with outside listeners, viewers, businesses, the community. And it's always provided me a very interesting insight as to, I think, what I intend to present and maybe what is taken in as consumer. You're consumers of the news. I'm a consumer of the news. I kind of ride, one button, two horses, I suppose, because I present and I also consume as well. But I always found that interesting is when folks will say, hey, I listened to this or saw this, and I'm like, you kind of missed that, didn't you? So as Angie mentioned, I've got a pretty diversified background, to say the least. I want to fill a few gaps in, I guess, on the little journey and really how it shaped my perception of the media. And I'm a very big critic at times of the very life I lead. As a journalist, as a member of the media, my job is to present to you what I think is the best, and it's what I think, and therein lies I think the crux. I started in radio when I was a 16-year-old child. Let's not do the math, by the way, but a long time ago. And I was in college working in radio. A lot of friends were getting into law enforcement and the service. I decided to go the law enforcement route. I graduated college, joined the force, and I kept media kind of as a hobby long before websites, long before webcams and Instagram and phones, all this stuff. It was, excuse me, it was a great therapeutic tool for me at the time to go out and deal. I'd made detective pretty young. I worked in sex crimes and narcotics, and I got to see some of the unsavoriest of the unsavory at the time. And it was radio and the media provided me an opportunity to have therapy, to go in and not worry about anything and cut loose and have fun and observe and talk. And it was a great time. Fast forward a few years, that went on for a long time. I moved to South Carolina in 2002. and I worked in a police department, had an opportunity to work at Cat Country. Some of you might remember that. Cat Country down in Charleston. It's now 107.5 The Game here, but it used to be down in Charleston. And an opportunity came that I could actually work with the community and do more in the video radio realm. And this is again about 02, 03. YouTube was coming live. MySpace, who remembers that, was around. And it was a great opportunity for me to blend my desire to serve the community, and that's what drove me to law enforcement, with using my voice and the talents I guess I had developed without knowing it, even in law enforcement. And so I started doing that. I came here in 05, and as Angie had said, I worked at United 2, Watch Fox, and I did a lot of community events. Obviously I host. I'm sure a lot of folks have seen me hosting just about everything, the last year notwithstanding. But it's always been a great outlet for me. So I've got a great cross section of background and talking with people and kind of understanding really the power of the media, but it's there. And that's kind of scary, to think about that there's that ability, and that's always been there, by the way. And so people start talking about the social media and the new platforms, and we'll get back to that, but I think that's always been there. And I'm going to tell you this, I firmly believe in the last 30, don't do the math, years that I've been in the business have probably been the most wide sweeping changes in a smaller amount of time than we've had at any other time in communicating as people. It's this typed word. You've got Marconi's broadcast. There's big things. There's the Samuel Morse, the Morse code. Those all happened, but if you look at that's over a period of 100+ years, I don't think things have changed as quickly as in the last 30. So we're going to get back into some changes in a few minutes. But I do want to share a little bit of hopefully brief background in the media, mass as it were. We'll call it mass media, social media, whatever you want to call it. But I think we have to have an understanding of kind of where it came from, communicating in general to at least more than just one person, not just to myself or a spouse or whatever. And it will give us a full circle as to kind of where we are now. And I think you might be surprised that, and as we talk about this evening, that some of the issues today are really not that much different. It's a different platform. It's a phone, but I think it's different. Think about first I guess the mission of the media being a voice giving information. I don't mean necessarily news. I don't mean People magazine, the radio. Media, there's a need for it in society, and there always has been, for entertainment, education, serving as a public forum. Media potentially reporting on a selectmen's meeting or in the ancient Rome, whatever they did, serving as a watchdog over government. And that's a big thing for this country, serving as a watchdog over government. And of course, providing news. What happened today? That's what media is. That's what happened today. So, I guess if we peel the onion back a little bit, we have to remember mass media didn't really exist until Jonas Gutenberg's printing press. That was early on. Of course, that led to the newspaper as we know it, the state newspaper or the Post and Courier or the Lexington newspapers, whatever. We'll come back to that for a minute. But remember, there's always been stories that have been told. So the newspapers and the radio and the TV and the Facebooks and the Instagrams, there may be a bigger audience, but there's always stories been told, passed down, the holographics. And I never can say that word right. Hologlyph. Angie, help me on that. How do I say that? Hologlyphics. How do I say that? It's one of those words. It's like Worcestershire. I can never say. But either way, didn't say it for me. There you go. She said it right. But think about that. That was a media, right? That was carved in the stone. It was left for the generations to read. That's I guess a media. Now, the first record of paper, that was back in 100 BC or so. Sure, it was information, it was news, not in mass quantities necessarily, because remember, you still had to write everything down. The mass part of that media would be 1,500 years later. So for the for 1,500 years or so, someone had to literally pen down a copy of anything they want to talk. We're talking the Bible, books, how-tos, any kind of old school book prior to the printing press was hand drawn. So, you might be reading a story about a castle around 1010 AD, but it was probably safe to assume it wasn't necessarily news as we think so. But remember, our definition of news and what's brand new has also changed. We'll get back to that. Of course, then you have to presume that people could read in the first place back then. A lot of people couldn't. So it would get back to storytelling. So let's fast forward a couple of centuries, a few anyway. The printing press around 1610. The printing press comes into play, and newspapers are being sold in Europe. So there you go. Of course, none of us were around. I don't think anyway. But the thing is that headlines were still sensationalized. There were still paper boys who were trying to sell copies of a newspaper. So they're giving you clickbait. That's a term we're going to use in a few minutes. But essentially, that's what it is. Get your newspaper here. The president's arrested. It doesn't matter that he was arrested because it was part of a fundraiser, and it was a fun thing. But sure enough, there you go. There's clickbait for you. It sounds kind of familiar, right? Well, speaking of paper, by the way, it was 1729 that Ben Franklin started printing the paper money. That was a fun little note in my research for tonight. 1729, where he started getting those dollar bills. Just throwing that out there. Write that down and bring that up next time you play Trivial Pursuit. So bringing us, I guess, at least to the colonial age, we've got a little document. You might have heard of it. It's called the Constitution. And with that is the First Amendment, which is freedom of speech. Now, in case it's been a minute since we were in social studies, and mine was 8th grade, Mr. Hood and Charles in Chesterfield, New Hampshire. Remember this little, I'm going to read this to make it right, but this is what it says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people to peacefully assemble and petition the government for a redress of grievances. So the original idea of the freedom of press and the freedom of speech was really, we all know you can't yell fire in a movie theater. We all know that. You just can't. But it didn't necessarily also say I can just say anything I want to because I want to. It really directed towards a government where you were allowed to say, because you weren't under King George, you weren't under, and you still aren't in many, many, many countries and organizations across the world. You're not allowed to say, I don't think that's right, but here you are. And the freedom of press still endures, and that's in that First Amendment is we have the right to question and say, Mr. President, Mr. Selectman, Mr. Governor, do we, what? I have a few questions. And that's a fundamental right, and that's really where that's born from. That's something that makes us very, very unique, and I think we all know that. Well, in the early 19th century, of course, Samuel Morse sent a series of dots and dashes. That became the Morse code. It created the first real means of communicating through what I would call maybe a mass media, that you didn't have to read a newspaper. I didn't have to tell you in person. The old game of telephone. Hey, did you see what Tyler did today? You're able to get that across the way. I could send a message from here to Florida instantly and not worry about the alliterations thereof and what would that message would really be when I get to Tampa. So I guess the first electronic communication. And keep in mind, it was 1862, by the way, that the sexy headlines we all love. Hey, the president's been arrested here. That's my best newsy thing anyway. But it was accompanied prior to that by artist rendition. So prior to, say, 1862, you had great artists who would put a picture in, but it was Matthew Brady who brought us pictures of the Civil War, when suddenly these two worlds start melding. And this is the whole thing. It's a melding of all these sources of information all coming together. And again, now we're talking over 1,600 years. So remember, my first premise was the last 30 have been light speed. This has been over several centuries, we're finally getting some technology and a way we communicate to the masses, to more than just one person at a time. So, of course, by the late 19th century, we've got the actual process of putting those pictures into books and newspapers and things like that. It's perfected. Now, post-war, of course, that's post the Civil War anyway, we had the advent of what? The telephone. Alexander Graham Bell. That gave the means of not just a one-way communication, because it was, here, read this, you can take a look at this, here's a picture, but you actually had two-way communication where you could actually have that conversation. And so that changed the game there for sure. And that gets us a lot closer to where we are, that communication, that ability to directly communicate. It's certainly, it's a learning business. It really is where we go to the premise of where we are. And so we've learned all these things along the way. In 1920, KDKA radio signed on, and they aired the results of the 1920 election, the presidential elections. By the way, that was going to be Warren G. Harding who won that. But they were the first ones to actually broadcast to the masses, where you didn't have to wait for the newspaper or to walk down the street and hear it from somebody. So all of a sudden now we're getting into this mass media where we can touch many people. Now in 1920, how many of us really had a radio antenna? And we can talk, that's a whole different conversation. But I want to take a minute again and just reflect to the point of media: to entertain, provide information, and educate. Those are some of the main tenets of what we do. It was the 1920s and 30s. We also started hearing voices. Remember the talkies, the movies? Yeah. And although it had been going on for hundreds of years, the ability to get a message to the masses was becoming easier and easier. You didn't have to go to the Colosseum in ancient Rome and yell and hope that everybody was in the sound of your voice and heard you. You now had that ability. It also, though, and here's what's scary, is it became easier and easier to manipulate people for a desired outcome. Heard of that coming? Heard of that before? Yeah. You fast forward to the 1940s, we have televisions in homes that really dial in the power of mass media. Now, remember, we're in America, which means that, at least then anyway, there was a solemn promise of those who provided news and information to be responsibly neutral, because there were only a few voices. So we had to trust, and there was that sacred bond, that what the journalists of days past said was accurate and honest. And I don't mean, I'm not saying that journalists today are not, but understand there's a lot more voices in the room, and that's the thing. That's where we're getting to in a few minutes, is there's a lot more voices in the room. But there was a great responsibility, because that was the only influx of media. That's all you got. Remember that the original purpose of radio and TV stations were a public service. They originally were not designed necessarily to make money and be commercial entities and sell these commercials and do all these things. They were a public service. Their job was to provide information to the masses. Something you need to know. Something is happening. Here's some information. That was it. It was only later that we got into commercials and really monetizing the whole broadcast and media industry. Remember also that governments, even then, and still do some, we're using mass media to control a populace through information or maybe disinformation with a desired outcome. They decided what they wanted, so they would provide and blanket the populace, anyone who's listening, with information. And if you hear the same message 100 again, and again, what's going to happen? You start believing. And that's kind of scary. So from the 1940s until really the 1990s, not a lot changed. We've got, radio and TV. That's really the games in town. Yeah, you've got the advent of cable and things, but really those are the mass mediums. In the 1990s, the 1970s, technically, I suppose, a couple of fellas, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, you've probably heard of them. But really, that's where things started to change. Up until that time, you had three networks. Well, I mean, Fox, I guess. Fox came along eventually, but there were three networks. You had radio. You had, of course, the local newspaper, the state, the Post and Courier. Keene Sentinel in my case, up in New Hampshire. And that's really what we turned to. We didn't have any other way to get news. We had no other way. We listened to, the Howards and the Toms and the people, because that's who we listened to. And then here we go. Here comes AOL. By the way, the best named company on the planet, because you're online and we're in America, right? America Online. Here's the internet. We now are connected well beyond the outside of Lexington or Columbia, the Midlands, well beyond anything else. I'm telling you, smartest name on the planet, America Online. Love it. All of a sudden, the news wasn't just read to us and talked about in our families or our church groups. All of a sudden, there was this conversation. So the news wasn't read to us. Casey Kasem didn't tell us what song was the best song ever, because we could say, hold on, have you heard this one? Because until then, you only hear on the radio what you were supposed to hear. Little influencing, right? It's kind of that way. Anyway, this is where the changes really start to go into warp speed, and that's what I'm saying. The last 30 years, I've watched these changes come into play, where media has become not quite, in my opinion, as civil servant and businesses, which is fine. We're in a capitalist society, but things started to change. Newsrooms have been gutted. There's a whole different conversation to be had about the changes. But here it comes. It also opens up the perspective, or I guess the voice, to have a whole lot of other noise in the room. 1998, here comes Google, Yahoo, Hotmail, MySpace. Who has a MySpace page still? I do. I looked it up tonight. I have a MySpace page. True story. Don't go searching it. I don't even know how to delete it. I would if I could. Anyway, but we're in the situation now where there's thousands of platforms of media, not just 3 networks, 4 now with Fox, 4 networks, a few radio stations and newspapers, which is great. More input, more conversation is fantastic in my opinion. The problem is it's so unregulated. And I'm not saying we regulate it, but please don't misunderstand. This is where we as consumers of news need to be responsible. This is really what we're talking about. So, and again, I'm not saying that anybody who wants to have a website and a voice and a podcast or whatever you want to do, have at it. I'm not saying we should regulate that at all, but the problem is that now there's so many voices, so many avenues of information. It's almost overload. We're consumers of news, right? So it just, how much can we consume? I've got a job. I've got to take care of my household, my dog. I can't possibly listen to 5,000 people telling me something in one day. We've all got things to do. A very simpler time. Think about some numbers here. In 2020, there were 1.7 billion websites on the web. 1.7 billion sites, 140,000 news sites every single day. 140,000 every single day, new websites are signed on. These are 2020 numbers. 2021, we've been home for a year doing nothing but building websites. My goodness, I can't even imagine the numbers. Every 60 seconds, 500 hours of YouTube content is put up on YouTube. So every minute, we've been talking, 20 minutes? So 500 times 20, that's 10,000 hours of content have been put up on YouTube since we've been talking. 149,513 emails are sent every minute. 3.3 million Facebook posts are made every minute. 3.3 million. 3.8 billion Google searches are made. Oh, and by the way, nearly 500,000 tweets every minute are sent out. 140 characters, or 240 now. 240 characters, and this is where it gets scary. That's not, by the way, it doesn't even include like Instagram, Snapchat, LinkedIn, WhatsApp. I don't have enough fingers or toes to even begin to count. It's all this information coming to us as consumers in 60 seconds. So how do we do this? How do we decide what's real? This is what gets to be scary. As a consumer of news, not as a producer of information and media that we talk and we, and I believe in the media. I believe in journalism. There are so many fantastic journalists that are out there that work every single day, that live by the standards of the original journalistic integrity of providing unbiased information. Let you decide. The problem is there's so much white noise. How do we decide? How do we know what's real and what's not? We've heard phrases like, clickbait. Now, don't get me wrong. Clickbait is no different from those newsboys. Get your paper here. Find out why the president got arrested now. That's clickbait. I mean, they want you to drop a couple of bits, I suppose, but it's the same thing. You sensationalize headlines to get people generate clicks. And why is that? For business, for an agenda. And that's scary, because there's so much information that's coming at you so fast. It's hard to tell. It's hard to know, what's there. But then you bring in the social media aspect. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, and I'll use some just very generic terms you probably have heard. And we are definitely going to be very, and I want to make sure, regardless of your political ideology, these things happen. You've got what's called an echo chamber. An echo chamber, as it's used in the media, the mainstream media anyway, or media, I guess in general, it's just that you're an echo chamber. You're hanging around with friends and you're saying, hey, I like the Red Sox. Hey, me too. So do I. Because you're hanging out in a Red Sox sports bar. The Yankees are terrible. I agree. But are they? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. But that's the scary thing about echo chambers. And where that comes into play is in social media. Social media will gravitate. Think about this. The last time you were talking with your best friend about a new car, what happened? All of a sudden you started getting new car ads. The last time you searched for a play set for your kid, all of a sudden on your social media platforms, you started getting ads for play sets. And that's advertising that's smart and it's useful. And as a small business owner, I use it myself. That's not necessarily an issue. Where it comes in is the responsibility of us as consumers to see beyond that. So in echo chamber, what'll happen is if you're somebody of a ideological lean, conservative, liberal, it doesn't matter, Red Sox lovers, you're going to be inundated with the messages that are popping up are exactly what's going to appeal to you, because you're going to click on them. Because, oh yeah, Red Sox fans, oh yeah, there you go. I'm going to click on that because I love the Red Sox. You're not maybe seeing 27 other things saying the Yankees are better than the Red Sox. And so you get in this world where social media is kind of guiding and controlling, saying, hey, there's nobody else who feels the way I do. And that's really kind of a scary thing for me. If you think of it as a consumer, as a responsible consumer of information, we've got to go and we've got to look beyond 240 characters, because Kim Kardashian says this is the best water to drink on the planet. Tell me why. And I think that I think that we have to, all this with all the COVID stuff, people on either side, blind sheep and blah. Well, okay. Tell me why. Tell me why these things happen. I think we have a responsibility to do a little more research. And this is where it gets hard, because we don't have just one voice anymore. And the algorithms are in such a place that you have to specifically go look to trusted news sources to maybe verify. Was it Reagan who said trust but verify? I mean, trust the media for sure. But I'm always going to I mean, that's what journalists do. We verify two or three different sources before we go to print and say, this is what happened. We do it as journalists. I feel like we as consumers have got that same responsibility. And so you've got to find sites, you've got to do a little due diligence. The library has great resources, by the way. The library is obviously nonpartisan. It's a great resource. Angie, I just saw you pop up. But I know that you guys have got great resources for people to be able to maybe do their homework, right?
Yes, we do. And I think that's definitely something worth talking about a little bit further. We've got on the lexcolibrary.com, on our website, there's a resources page, and there are tons of trustworthy sites for news, but also to do some research on specific topics. There's one in particular, Gale in Context, Opposing Viewpoints. And this is a great site that offers literally pro-con list for any debatable argument, which I think is very relevant right now. So yes, that is something that we do offer here. Of course, we've got plenty of books too, but as far as current news and media, our website is a great resource.
And I think it's important that we're in this cancel culture realm where we're supposed to be diversified, and I feel like sometimes and again, it happens. This is on every aspect, on no matter where you fall on that political spectrum, far left, far right, right dead center. I just feel like there's I don't want to hear it, because that's what we've become accustomed to because of the echo chamber that's been created. Is we don't want to hear a difference of opinion, and there's so much to be learned. And I think you need to be, when you have an opinion, if it's something that's important, if you're going to vote on a representative for the Senate or Congress or governor or president, vote. You do. I think we have a responsibility to dig beyond a headline, to say, all right, this is really what's going on. This is really, and it takes time. It's work, and that's the problem. I know we're busy. Everybody's running 100 miles an hour. We've got families and spouses and jobs and soccer practice and all these things to do, and we have all this inbound information. It makes it easy to look down and go, well, 240 characters, there's a headline. You know what? Yeah. And I think we need to, as consumers, be, especially for the big decisions. I mean, if I want to try the new cheeseburger at McDonald's, all right, well, if Kim Kardashian likes it, now give it a shot. But I think that the big decisions in life, we've got to get beyond that echo chamber, that cancel culture, whatever you want to call it, the fancy buzzwords of the day, to, okay, drill down to what you truly believe in your heart. Ideology doesn't matter. If you truly believe in this side, then you know it's real, good. And the same thing. And I hope, I long someday we're going to get back to the world where we can actually have that conversation and not unfriend each other because we happen to be on different sides of the aisle. But that's a whole different topic altogether. But there's a lot of great resources. There was, and Angie, you sent this to me. There was, and this is an unofficial, I guess, poll, I guess you call it, of folks that who reflect credibility, accuracy, things like that. So you've got, and again, on this poll, this is just a screenshot of a poll. If you're heading towards the liberal side of things, BuzzFeed, CNN, the Huffington Post, you get a little more moderate. You get towards still very liberal leaning, ABC, AP, Bloomberg, the BBC. And you asked me, Angie, this a few weeks ago. I think one of the most credible sources, because I listen to a lot of BBC, is the BBC, British Broadcasting. NPR. I just feel like there's some Reuters is another great one.
Right.
And it's funny because some of these crossovers. So AP is also central and even towards the right side too. So again, this is a very unofficial, unscientific poll, I'm sure. And then of course you go towards the more conservative side. You've got Fox News, Newsmax, the Post. Fox News Opinion is on that far right side. The Daily Mail. So and this, I'm not saying this is a guide, but I think if you listen to anyone enough, and I think we need to listen and get out of that echo chamber on ourselves. I think that if you're a conservative, watch CNN for a few minutes. Read some of these, just get that opinion, and then somewhere find the answer. Because if you're talking about these ones that are way left and way right, well, neither one of them are right. Somewhere in the middle is going to be kind of what's best for your own heart. Because at the end of the day, it's about you. You alone, I can't alone change a thing. It's about heart. And if enough people vote that way or believe that way, that's how we digest information.
Tyler, I think you bring up a really great point about listening to or doing some research to find opposing views when we're talking about controversial or hot button topics. But it's, I think, critically important to make sure you're sourcing your information. You're finding out where your sources are getting their information from, how recently things have been published. If an author might have some other motivation, or a journalist even. And trying to discern all that can be very difficult for, you're right, busy people. So can you expand on that just a little bit? Can you talk to us more about what we can do as individuals to make sure that we're trying to get the best information?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to find those ones that are more trusted and they're vetted out. Maybe you can get them. The library is a great resource to find those. Find the ones that you feel don't have an axe to grind, that are not always critical of one side and pro the other side. And we all know what we're talking about. You've got to find those that are just the facts. Here's what happened. Not this fool, this is crazy, this is no. Here's what happened. This story, whatever it's going to be. There was a plane crash today, and this happened, and the FAA decided that perhaps it was this or that. You got to go back to the sources of where they come. And you're right. I mean, it's a lot of work, and I wouldn't suggest that you, for every bit of gossip you hear from Hollywood, you need to go worry about it. I don't think so. I do not give a hoot who Jennifer Aniston is dating. But when it comes to bigger decisions that matter, that impact you, your wallet, your family, your career, the country, when it comes to those decisions that you're even standing on. I mean, if you want to go to a coffee, to a cocktail party and start expounding, and your only argument are 4 or 5 tweets that your favorite opinion journalist sent out, you're not standing on very good ground, and you're not helping make your case. The whole point of politics and is influence, is to talk, is to say that I want you to vote for me because of this, and here's 7 reasons why. And you go, I believe in this, this, and this. You're speaking to what I believe in my heart. And so, if your whole idea of having a conversation, exchanging ideas, challenging viewpoints is you and I disagree, I think you're wrong, and here's 7 reasons why. My goal is to actually be able to say here's why succinctly, not because I think your hair is terrible or because I don't want to even talk to you because you disagree. But say this, that's where you get that exchange of ideas, and you go, you know what? I never thought about it like that. That's actually a good point. Some of my closest friends are exactly politically as opposite as you could be. And we have the best discussions because it's based on, we both know, we hopefully know what we're talking about. We believe it. And we can still at the end of the day go, man, I just don't see it that way. Let's go get a glass of milk, or, whatever, cup of coffee. And so, I think the bigger things is you take those time, the big decision points, is take a little extra time. If you're going to spend the time to say, well, this is what I think, well, give it some critical thinking time. I know it's hard. I know we don't have any time for anything, but I would challenge all of us, myself included, to do that, Angie.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And it's funny, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but it doesn't even have to be these hot button issues and topics that are super controversial with everyone. Recently, there was a story that kind of made headlines nationwide about these what are the clamworms, I think, in South Carolina, and don't go swimming, and look at these scary hooky worms or whatever. I don't know. They were very sensational headlines. But at the end of the day, DNR came out and said, absolutely not. This is a totally normal, a very natural event that happens every year, where I don't know what they do. They gather together these clamworms down on the coast. Nothing to be afraid of. You're fine. It only lasts for a few days. It's just not a big deal.
Right.
But that story got taken and pushed out, like I said, nationwide, as some rare and unusual thing and very scary. And I think that's the part that is really very concerning, is you see people see that headline and they share it on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, without digging a little bit deeper. So we want to encourage folks to do that, to look a little further into those things.
And I love that example, because think about this too, is take it a step further, is everybody in the world pushes out that South Carolina is infested with these clamworms. Don't come here because they're dangerous and scary. Well, what happens? One of the largest parts of our economy in South Carolina is what?
We're hurting that industry. Yep. Right there on the coast.
And so if people are scared to death to come to South Carolina because we have these incredible, clamworms that are 17 feet tall, why are you going there? And that's what's scary. That is the power of this group think, that all of a sudden, oh my God, it doesn't take you long to go, wait a second, hang on 1 second, and
Let's check this out.
Do a little research on clamworms, and you find out, yeah, it's pretty normal. Go to DNR, call DNR. It's that extra step that I think we're forgetting to take, because we see it on 240 characters and just presume it's on the internet. It's got to be real.
Yeah, that's a problematic attitude, I think. But it's something we're seeing a lot more of, and social media, I think, probably takes advantage of that. And I know you've talked before about some of the algorithms that are built in place, to where if you're on Facebook, your news feed may be filled with people who agree with you or like the same kinds of things that you do, or on the opposite end of the spectrum. I've read reports in the past, I'd have to fact check myself here, but I believe that Facebook has some algorithms built in to incite anger or frustration. That's a very powerful motivator for people to like or comment, engage, and interact with posts, which makes them money and keeps you on the site longer. So showing things in the news feed that are meant to agitate someone is a method that some social medias, I know they've used that in the past. I can't say today if they still do.
I would believe, I can't back it up. So there you go. You know, right. I don't want to say it, have you believe it? But I can tell you this, 100% true. I mean, that goes back to the way before social media. I mean, I came from the world of morning radio, and we still do this in morning TV. If we're going to lower the curtain down, I'm going to probably tell some secrets that somebody will be mad at me for, but I don't care. Nobody in a morning show, especially when you've got an entertaining, fun morning show, right? Think of your favorite radio morning show from years past. You know, Rick Dees or whoever, Tyler and Ken show. There's a good one. Nobody wants to hear. Nobody isn't going to engage with a radio station, or a medium that's all like, yeah, you're right, you're right. If you and I had a morning show and we just told each other how right and smart we are, that isn't terribly interesting listening, because half your audience is like, I disagree and y'all are boring. And so good morning shows, and I will say that because we had a great morning show, and we actively practiced this, was, okay, we're going to talk about this. What is your take and what is mine? And again, I'm part of the media. Here I am putting out fake news. I mean, it's not news, it's opinion part. But I would say, all right, you feel this way? I'm taking this end. I may not even believe that at all, but we're trying to create this because that's what people want to do. What's the old adage in the news? If it bleeds, it leads. It's just human nature. We want to hear bad things, and you can look it up. If it bleeds, it leads. That is a mantra of news stations for the last however long news has been around. And so people want to hear that, and and you got to think about when you're digesting information or ingesting information. Okay, so yeah, there is going to be that push, because that's what you want. Because you listen to the radio, and if you and I have a morning show and we're talking about, we're on opposite ends, half the audience will be like, Tyler, you're right. Half the audience will be like, Angie, and they're going to call in and be like, you're an idiot, Tyler. And that's kind of the whole point. That's what we're trying to do, is whip people up into a fervor, right?
Right.
And a lot of what I think we're seeing and so when I say media, I mean social media. I don't mean just the networks and things like that. I mean mass media. That includes every 140 billion websites there are out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're trying to do. Is they're trying to get you to click on them, engage with them, because that translates into dollars, influence, and all that stuff.
So one question too, Tyler, when somebody, you mentioned some of these websites or media sources, when somebody's trying to find a reputable news source, if you say, I just want somebody to tell me what's going on, I don't want their opinion, I just want to know what's going on. Are there some key things that they should be looking for or looking out for to kind of help discern fact from opinion?
I mean, it's hard. I think, again, this is my opinion, so, take it for what it's worth. I'll tell you right now, here's preface, my opinion. I think it's in how the story is. If it's not just, here are the facts, there's probably some sort of, and it may be subconscious. I mean, because I write things that I don't think necessarily are with any, malice or forethought. But certainly you can see my opinion, when I do, because I do a lot of engaging stuff. So I do a lot of, man on the street things. I do cooking shows. I do a lot of that kind of feature stuff versus standing, in a war zone reporting on there were 17 bombs dropped. So, I mean, I realize that because that's what I do. And I realize that mine is not necessarily that old school, Tom Brokaw, here's what happened, Walter Cronkite kind of thing. But I think that if you're looking for news, if you recognize, and again, it takes work. If you recognize in the reporter, the article you're reading, the reporter you're listening to, the story you're reading on the internet, I think if it gets into anything derogatory, I think you're getting into opinion. I think it's giving you that. If you've got a presidential candidate who, here's what he said, not, and other people, right? And I maybe I'm hypersensitive to it, but I realize I see it in how things are written. And you watch the two political sides. If you watch a CNN story and a Fox News story on the exact same event, you can see it. And that might be a good exercise to look at the exact same event. And it doesn't matter what event it is, pick one that, folks that are on one side and one the other, and how they tell the same story. Find that one where you feel like there's not that angle. And there you go. You'll find your news source.
Using multiple sources is absolutely a great way to find out what the story is, right? But I think most importantly is taking the time to review those, and like we were talking about earlier, kind of making sure you understand that there's no agenda, finding out where they're getting their information from, which can be very tough and time consuming. So where do we go? I don't go to Facebook for news.
There's your first step. How about the list? It'd be easier to say that. Where don't you go for your news?
Right.
Where do you go?
Social media is probably not an ideal place to get your news, right? It's a great place to interact with friends or family or coworkers or whatever, but not for news. I know there was certainly a lot of controversy over the last year for a variety of news topics. I found Reuters to be pretty dependable and unbiased. I think every journalist is naturally going to show a little bit of their own personal biases at times, especially with controversial topics. But what you're talking about, comparing news sources, is a great way to do it. Especially when we're talking about political issues, watching or even reading online the same story from Fox News and from CNN, or you're going to get two very, very different perspectives. And somewhere in the middle is probably going to be where the truth lies.
Yeah, it's a very esoteric concept, and I'm in the business, so I do this what I do. I don't think that your average consumer of news necessarily is going to take all this time, because, man, like I said, you've got a job and a house and a family. You got to get the kids to soccer. You're not going to sit and dig up a story that doesn't impact you until it does, and therein lies the crux of which are the ones I should really dig into and which are the ones that really don't matter. And that's a decision I've got to make, you've got to make, everyone watching is going to make. But yeah, if you can find that source that you trust, yeah, that's going to be key at least, and that's where you start. And again, I'm not talking for things that really don't matter. The new shoe, what new Nikes to buy because my favorite influencer on social media says buy them. I don't know, go buy them if you want to. But I'm talking about things that matter, things that shape your life, that potentially have an impact on your life, good or bad. I think those are the things that warrant you spending a little more time digging into and sourcing, like you were saying. Is it Fox News? Is it CNN? Is it The Blaze? There's sources on both sides. I mean, and you can go as far either way as you want to. You can go to the ends of the work, meet in the middle, I suppose, the other side. But yeah, you've got to find those, and those are the ones you can go to and realize that there's probably in most areas going to be some sort of angle, and it's human nature at the end of the day.
It absolutely is. I think one thing too to remind everybody is to try to avoid those sensational headlines. I mean, if you want to read the article, great, to find out more information. But if that seems to be a real trigger. If you see one of those traditional clickbait headlines, it's a good indicator that you're going to need to dig a little bit deeper.
Here's a great example too, and we've all seen them. And listen, I get sucked into them too. I'm tell you right now, I'll go down a rabbit hole as quick as Bugs Bunny will.
Yeah.
But usually at the bottom of most any stories you're reading, it doesn't matter what website it's on. It doesn't matter, if it's a local, national source. At the bottom, there goes paid things, and you'll get like she was pretty when she was 16. Look at her now. Or, have you seen this actor? Look what, and you're like, oh, click. And you never even get to that headline. They didn't even give you that, Like, do you know the secrets about Sean Connery? No, I love Sean Connery. I click on it. There's nothing about Sean Connery at all. And, and those are at the bottom of almost every web page in the world.
Yeah, it's funny how you learn to tune those out after a while. I will say it's so interesting that the changes that have happened because of the internet. You were talking earlier about some of the history of just media in general, and we know propaganda has been around for, as long as there's been news, right?
It's nothing new. Yeah, this is nothing new. It just now there's so many more voices. There's so much more noise in the room than there used to be. But it's always been around. Like, this is nothing new. Individually, I'm not doing anything different if I want to send out my message than anyone else who had enough ability to print a newspaper or get a media. Just now, it doesn't take anything but being a keyboard warrior sitting at your desk at home. That's the difference. It's the widespread ability to flood the market with your message. I want to say right or wrong with your message. Leave it at that.
The internet certainly has changed the name of the game, I think, for all of us. And it does require some research and some homework to really get to the bottom of especially controversial things. Obviously not which Nikes to buy, but some of the more controversial topics out there right now. I do want to open this up. I did post a comment here in the chat box, but if we do have anybody that's got any questions for Tyler or comments even, please feel free to share those there, and then we will pass them along and over to him. But in the meantime, Tyler, I did want to tell you, one of the news sites that we have linked on our library website, it's really interesting. It's a project from a data visualization company, and they've made something called Beautiful News Daily. I'll read their description so I don't mess it up, but it's a collection of good news, positive trends, uplifting stats and facts, and it's all beautifully visualized. It's worth checking out because consuming so much news, whether it be through traditional channels or social media, can be stressful. Certainly over 2020 and into 2021, there's been a lot going on. So it's nice to see somebody has created something. It is a beautiful display, but it's good news from around the world. So wanted to share that too, because it's a neat little website.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I said before the whole it bleeds, it leads. That's been the media forever. Mm-hmm. And you're right. I think especially now, I think that there's a reason to seek out some positivity. We've got 5 million reasons to be negative about everything on this planet right now. Everywhere we turn, we hear bad news about stuff. Gas prices going up. The economy's bad. My goodness, all these things are happening. Wouldn't it be nice to have some positive news? Wouldn't it be nice to go seek some? You know what? There are good people in this world. There are people who love this planet, who love this country, who love their neighbors, who love their family. I mean, there's so much love. And listen, I'll tell you this. I do. We talked earlier. I do boat tours. I interact with people all the time. That is my favorite part of what I get to do, because I'm telling you, it is easy if you live your life on social media and you live your life, to think that all there is bad in this world. And my goodness, that is so not true. There are so many amazing people of every walk of life. I mean, I don't see it. And maybe I got rose-colored glasses. You can say what you want, and I'm in the media, and I have to balance that being jaded. And I get the law enforcement background, in doing what I did back in the day, work sex, crimes, and narcotics. I saw the worst of the worst. But to be able to say, you know what, that's a small little group of people with a big voice. This is pretty great. Mm-hmm. I love interacting with people because fundamentally, I don't care. You walk into Walmart, Publix, you go to the movie theater. I guess you can't do that right now in many places, but you walk down the street, people are great. I mean, there's great things that happen every day.
Right. So. Yeah, it's nice to be reminded of that, especially when the news does feel a little bit overwhelming, because I mean, it's going to be the stories that capture interest, and those often aren't great stories. So wanted to share that. And then I do want to remind everyone as well, some of the resources that we have available at the library. Of course, it's really interesting. I checked out a couple books over the last month, Tyler, since we've been talking about this, on the history of propaganda and fake news, as we're calling it today. Some very interesting books out there. And then we've also got ebooks and audiobooks, of course, on our apps, Libby and Hoopla. But the biggest resource that I really hope people take advantage of, because I don't know that many people know it's there, is the resource page on the Lexington County Public Library System website. It is just incredible. And you know then that you're getting pretty dependable information. A lot of it is scholarly articles, but there's reviews of court cases. There's all kinds of things that you know you're getting factual information from. So I do want to remind our viewers of that. And then remind anybody one last time too, before we have to wrap up, if they have any questions, throw those in the chat and we can address those real quickly.
And don't forget, y'all, this broadcast is available. So if you're watching this later, if it's not actually the 6th of May at 6:58 p.m., you can reach out to us directly, and I'm happy to discuss anything that pops in your mind. If I agree or disagree with the last few minutes of my opinion, notice I didn't say news, opinion, you please reach out to me if it's beyond, again, the 6th of May at 6:58 p.m. Eastern time.
Tyler, I so appreciate your time. I really appreciate you joining us today and talking with some of these really very important topics. This issue of fake news, of course, is everywhere, and media bias has certainly become more common. And like you mentioned earlier, there are just so many voices now with the internet. So want to remind everybody to use those library databases and use different news sites, to use multiple sources and to review them when you can. I know it's tough, and that's very hard to commit to, but it's really important when we're regurgitating that information down the road to make sure it's factual. But thank you again so much, Tyler. I know you're very busy, so we'll let you get back to it. But I
got TV to do tomorrow morning, so gotta go.
All right, Tyler. Well, have a good evening, and thank you again.
Thank you.